Get ready for one of the most explosive moments you've ever witnessed. What seemed like a day of celebration and love turns into a battle of hidden truths and shocking revelations. Lucas, the disinherited son, didn't come to just be a spectator at his mother's wedding. He came to stop a mistake that could change everything. He is about to reveal secrets that have been buried for far too long, challenging everyone and everything. What does Lucas know about the man his mother is about to marry? Will he be able to convince everyone before it's too late? Stay until the end, because this story will hold your attention from start to finish. Be sure to like, subscribe to the channel, and comment on what you would do in Lucas' shoes. Is he right? Let's find out together. The city of Seattle, as usual, was covered by a thick blanket of clouds. The gentle sound of rain against the window filled Lucas Miller's small apartment, but he barely noticed. His eyes were fixed on a crumpled piece of paper on the table. It was the invitation to his mother Clara Miller's wedding to her new partner, Maurício Thompson. Lucas Miller, you are invited to share this moment of happiness with us. What should have been a warm message for most people felt like a cruel insult to Lucas. There was no happiness for him in that union. Clara had disinherited him 3 years ago after a series of arguments and misunderstandings. He hadn't been part of that family since. And now his mother, who used to be his greatest ally, was marrying a man he knew wasn't who he seemed. Lucas closed his eyes, letting the past envelop him. The pain of distance and rejection was deep. He had grown up idolizing his mother, Clara, a strong and determined woman who, along with his father, David Miller, built a thriving hotel empire. They were a prosperous and united family, at least until his father died in a tragic car accident. That event changed everything. Lucas was 22 when his father died. He was young and inexperienced, but he was willing to carry on David's legacy. However, grief transformed Clara into someone else. In the first few months, she seemed lost, disoriented. The nights Lucas heard her muffled sobs from the other side of the bedroom door still haunted his mind. At first, he tried to comfort her, but Clara's pain made her distant. Yet, the distance wasn't what troubled him most. The real problem started when Maurício entered their lives. Lucas remembered the first time he saw Maurício Thompson. He was elegant, charismatic, and had an air of confidence that seemed to immediately charm his mother. Maurício, a successful financial consultant, appeared as a savior, offering help to reorganize the family's finances after David's death. Clara was vulnerable, and Maurício was efficient in filling the void she felt. At first, Lucas even tried to see Maurício as a positive figure, someone helping his mother overcome her depression. But something about Mauricio's behavior bothered him. He was too controlled, too cold, and the more he involved himself in the family business, the more Lucas felt sidelined. When Lucas finally started investigating on his own, he discovered inconsistencies, suspicious financial movements, transactions that seemed to hide something darker. He tried to warn his mother, but she was blind. To Clara, Maurício was the only person she trusted after David's death. Frustrated and angry, Lucas began confronting her more and more, and each argument pushed Clara further away. Until, in one final confrontation, Clara uttered the words that changed his life forever. "You're disinherited. You're no longer part of this. You have no place in my life anymore." Lucas left the family home that same night, with nothing but a suitcase and a broken heart. It was a wound that never healed. Now, 3 years later, sitting in his cramped apartment, he stared at the wedding invitation from the woman he once called mother, a wedding to a man he knew was dangerous. Lucas took a deep breath and tossed the invitation onto the table. The decision not to attend the wedding would have been easy, but he was no longer the confused young man who had been cast out. In those 3 years, Lucas had dedicated himself to an almost obsessive mission, discovering who Maurício Thompson really was. And what he found confirmed his worst fears. Maurício had a history of financial manipulation, involvement in suspicious bankruptcies, and even lawsuits he had managed to cover up. He was a calculating man who used his charm to gain trust and then destroyed everything around him. Lucas knew he couldn't stay out of it this time. He had enough evidence to expose Maurício, but he needed to choose the right moment. Clara wouldn't listen to him, just as she hadn't in the past, but the wedding guests, the press, and the shareholders of Miller Hotels would. He planned to make such an impact that there would be no way for his mother to continue being blind. The rain outside intensified, beating harder against the window, as if the sky itself knew of the storm that was coming. Lucas stood and walked over to the window, looking at the streets of Seattle, illuminated by the headlights of passing cars. He knew that for Clara, this wedding would be the biggest event of her life, the fresh start she had longed for after David's death. For Lucas, though, it would be the stage for his revenge. He picked up the envelope containing the documents he had gathered. Inside were all the necessary proofs to expose Maurício: bank records, suspicious transfers, even testimonies from former associates Maurício had wronged. It was a heavy blow, but Lucas felt no remorse. He couldn't allow the same tragedy that had befallen his father to repeat itself. Maurício was manipulating his mother, and he was determined to expose it. The week of the wedding was approaching fast. Lucas knew he would have to travel to Napa Valley, where the ceremony was to be held at a luxurious vineyard, the perfect setting for high society, with guests from the business elite and the media. Clara wanted it to be an unforgettable wedding, and Lucas was about to ensure it would be, but for all the wrong reasons. As he prepared his things for the trip, he wondered how the reunion with his mother would be. 3 years had passed since the last time they spoke. Would she still see him as the rebellious son who destroyed her peace, or as the man who was about to save her from disaster? Lucas didn't have answers, but he knew he was ready for the confrontation. The rain began to ease, but the sound of the remaining drops brought a sense of calm before the storm. Lucas looked once more at the documents, his only weapon at the moment. He was going to that wedding, and at the right moment, he would reveal the truth. It wouldn't be easy, it wouldn't be pretty, but it was necessary. His mind was made up. The next time he saw Clara, it wouldn't be as a disinherited son asking for forgiveness, but as a man bringing the truth. And nothing else mattered. The sky was clear over Napa Valley that autumn morning, with the sun lighting up the vineyards that stretched for miles. A gentle breeze rustled the leaves, creating a dreamy setting for the wedding Clara Miller had meticulously planned. There was something theatrical about the ceremony, which suited Clara perfectly. She was the type of woman who loved to be the center of attention, and this day would be no different. Everything was set for the perfect wedding, except for one detail no one imagined: Lucas. Lucas had been on the road for hours, driving toward the vineyard where the wedding would take place. His body was tense. Every mile he drove made the pressure in his chest grow. The wedding invitation, which he had tossed aside days ago, now lay crumpled on the passenger seat. Although he didn't need the invitation to know where he was going, it was a symbol of what he was about to face. He wasn't expected there, and to be honest, he wasn't welcome either. He knew his presence wouldn't be celebrated, far from it. But Lucas wasn't going to be welcomed. He was going because he had a mission: to protect his mother from a man who was destroying his family's legacy from the shadows. Every mile brought him closer to the confrontation he had put off for years. As the car navigated the winding roads leading to the vineyard, Lucas felt the weight of every decision that had brought him to this point. He had never imagined his life would take this path. When he was young, his world revolved around his family and the hotel empire his father had built. He believed his mother, Clara, would always be by his side until Maurício Thompson came along. Maurício was like a hurricane that tore everything from Lucas: his mother's trust, his place in the family business, and even his dignity. Being disinherited by his own mother was a pain he still carried like a scar. The wedding was scheduled for early afternoon, and Lucas knew he was running late. As he spotted the vineyard entrance, his heart began to race. There were security guards at the gate, all with radios and attentive eyes, dressed in elegant uniforms to match the level of the ceremony. He took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. He knew he wouldn't be turned away, not with the invitation in hand, but the real battle wasn't getting past the security. It was what would come afterward. Lucas parked the car a safe distance from the main entrance, where guests were beginning to arrive in luxurious cars. He watched for a moment as women in elegant dresses and men in impeccable suits stepped out of limousines, their smiles shining under the golden sun. They were friends, business partners, and celebrities from Clara's circle. It was a world of luxury that, by right, was also his, but now seemed as distant as an old dream. Slowly, Lucas got out of the car and adjusted his tie. He had prepared for this moment, dressing appropriately to avoid drawing too much attention until the right time. He walked towards the main gate, and as he approached, the looks began to turn towards him. Some recognized him, although his face was different from 3 years ago. Lucas was no longer the promising young man full of hopes who attended gala events with his mother. Now, he was a man hardened and wounded by time, and his presence there would be anything but ignored. Upon reaching the gate, one of the security guards stopped him with a polite but firm expression. "Name?" asked the man, looking at Lucas with a hint of suspicion. Lucas pulled the crumpled invitation from his pocket and handed it over without saying a word. The guard looked at the paper, then at Lucas, and something in his posture changed. He knew that name. Everyone knew it. It was the name of the disinherited son, the young man Clara had pushed out of her life and who, until now, had been missing from the public scene. "You are," began the guard, but Lucas interrupted him with a firm look. "Yes, I am her son." Without further questions, the guard let him through, but the curious gazes of the other guests began to follow him. Lucas knew he was standing out, but he needed to keep his composure. He walked along the stone path leading to the large open area where the wedding would take place. The venue was spectacular, surrounded by vineyards that seemed to stretch to the horizon, with a white tent set up under the blue sky, where guests were beginning to settle. Lucas's heart pounded in his chest as he approached. He knew his mother hadn't seen him yet, and that gave him a slight advantage. Clara was undoubtedly busy, coordinating the final details, receiving congratulations, and preparing for her grand entrance. She had always liked perfection, control, and Lucas knew that his appearance at that moment would be an earthquake shaking the whole flawless structure. When he reached the main area, he briefly blended in with the guests, who were gathered around tables decorated with white flowers and lush arrangements. Lively conversations filled the air, and Lucas observed silently, searching for a familiar face. He spotted his mother, for a moment, across the tent. Clara looked stunning in a dress that seemed to have come out of a fashion magazine. Her face impeccably made up, her smile radiant. She shone in that environment, as she always had. But Lucas knew that behind that smile was a woman who was blind to reality. Maurício was still not in sight, giving Lucas more time to plan his move. He approached the table in the corner, where he could better observe the environment. He knew he had to wait for the right moment. The ceremony hadn't started yet, and he needed to be patient. When Maurício appeared, the real confrontation would begin. As he waited, a wave of emotions flooded his mind. It was a mix of anger, sadness, and anxiety. Seeing his mother so happy, so blind to what was about to happen, was torture. He wanted to scream, wanted her to see him, to know that he was there, not as a shadow from the past, but as the only person who could save her from the mistake she was about to make. Suddenly, the music began to play. The ceremony was about to start. Silence fell over the guests, who began to take their seats. Clara made her grand entrance, and Lucas's gaze fixed on her. For a brief moment, their eyes met, and Clara's smile faltered. She had seen him. The instant Clara saw Lucas was brief, but intense enough to completely change her expression. The smile she had worn so gracefully disappeared, replaced by a momentary confusion. Lucas noticed the tremor in her lips, the hesitation that few would have noticed, but he knew his mother well enough to read her emotions in a fraction of a second. She hadn't expected to see him there. In fact, she probably wished he would never cross her path again. But now, the moment had come. Clara would have to face the son she had abandoned. Lucas stayed at the back, watching as his mother paused, but soon regained her composure. Clara had always been a controlled woman, an expert at hiding her emotions in public. With a quick breath, she resumed her smile, as if she had merely stumbled upon a fleeting thought. The guests, distracted by the start of the ceremony, did not notice the tension hanging in the air between mother and son. But Lucas knew Clara felt it, and that was all he needed. Maurício finally appeared. He walked down the aisle to the sound of soft music, the typical confident and imposing groom who charmed everyone around him with a false aura of assurance. He was impeccably dressed, with a smile that seemed genuine to others, but to Lucas exuded pure falseness. The groom greeted some guests as he moved forward, charming them with his charismatic presence. But like Clara, he had not yet seen Lucas. Lucas, now feeling the blood rushing through his veins, knew the moment to reveal himself was coming, but he still waited. Each step of Maurício was a reminder of the treacherous man who had destroyed not only his family, but also his father's name. And with every second Lucas watched him, his anger grew. It wasn't irrational anger. It was anger born from 3 years of solitude, of being rejected, disinherited, and ignored. As Maurício approached the altar, Lucas began to walk slowly toward the front. He could feel the gazes of some guests following him, curious. The murmurs grew as his presence attracted more attention, but most were still focused on the couple. Lucas took a deep breath, staying calm. He had to control himself. This wasn't just about him. It was about exposing the truth. He needed to choose the exact moment to maximize the impact. He was in an emotional and psychological battlefield, and every move had to be calculated. The ceremony began. Clara and Maurício were now at the altar, ready to start what should be the happiest moment of their lives. The officiant began to speak, and silence filled the room. Lucas, however, heard only the beats of his own heart, quickening with each word coming from the officiant's mouth, words that celebrated a union he knew was built on lies. Lucas stood just a few meters from the altar when he heard the words that made him finally act. If anyone present knows of any impediment to this couple being united, speak now or forever hold your peace. Time seemed to stop. The breeze that had previously blown gently through the vineyards was now just a distant murmur. Lucas looked at the crowd, at his mother, at Maurício, and felt the tension in his muscles about to break. "I have something to say." His voice cut through the silence of the ceremony like a sharp blade. Everyone's gaze immediately turned to him. The officiant, confused, stopped speaking, and Clara, who had been trying to maintain her composure, turned abruptly. Her face was pale, and her eyes widened with surprise and fear. Lucas took a few more steps, feeling all eyes fixed on him. The murmur among the guests began, and he could hear whispers asking who he was and what was happening. "Lucas, what are you doing here?" Clara finally managed to say, her voice laden with disbelief and tension. This was not his place, and she knew it. She tried to maintain her composure, but Lucas noticed the control mask his mother wore was starting to crumble. Maurício, beside her, remained silent. He looked at Lucas with a mix of surprise and irritation, but stayed calm, as if expecting Lucas to be just a minor interruption, something he could manipulate and dismiss afterward. But Lucas knew it wouldn't be that easy. "I didn't come to attend this wedding as a guest, Mother," Lucas replied, keeping his voice steady, though his heart was racing. "I came to prevent you from making the biggest mistake of your life." The buzz among the guests increased. Now everyone knew who he was. The disinherited son, the young man who had been pushed out of the family and was now there, in the middle of the ceremony, making accusations. The shocked expressions of the attendees made it clear that no one knew what was coming. "This is ridiculous." Maurício finally spoke, breaking the heavy silence that had settled. He stepped forward, trying to maintain an air of control, but Lucas saw the glint of nervousness in his eyes. "You have no right to be here. Not after everything that happened." Lucas kept his gaze fixed on Maurício, ignoring his words. The moment he had been waiting for was finally happening, and he wasn't going to stop now. "The right to be here is the only thing I have left, Maurício," Lucas said with a cutting, tone, and it's time someone spoke the truth. Clara's face was a mix of anguish and anger. She looked at Lucas with eyes that seemed to plead for understanding, but Lucas had no intention of giving her any more leeway. He had waited 3 years for this moment, and he wasn't about to let it slip away. The officiant, unsure how to proceed with the ceremony now interrupted by such a revelation, looked around and then back at Lucas. "What exactly are you accusing them of, Lucas?" he asked, trying to regain control of the situation. Lucas took a deep breath and stepped closer to the altar, making sure everyone could hear his next words. "I'm not just accusing them of anything," he said. "I'm here to tell the truth. Clara disinherited me and tried to erase my existence. And Maurício, who you are about to marry, is nothing but a man who used that to his advantage. He is the one who took everything from my father and destroyed our family." The room erupted in gasps and whispers. The guests were clearly unsettled, and Clara's face turned a deep shade of red. Maurício tried to maintain his composure, but could no longer hide his agitation. "This is absurd," Clara finally shouted, her voice breaking. "You have no right to be here, to disrupt this event with your lies. You are nothing but a bitter man trying to ruin my happiness." Lucas shook his head, resolute. "It's not about bitterness, Mother. It's about truth and justice. I'm not here to ruin your day. I'm here to prevent a deception from continuing." The tension in the air was palpable. The officiant looked around helplessly, realizing he had lost control of the ceremony. The guests were now fully engaged in the scene unfolding before them, with many whispering among themselves and others staring in shock. Clara, now visibly distressed, turned to Maurício. She sought comfort in him, but he was no longer the calm and collected figure he had been before. His demeanor was now that of a man caught in a lie he could no longer maintain. The final moments of the ceremony were lost in chaos. The officiant attempted to regain control, but it was clear that the event had been irrevocably altered. Lucas knew that this was just the beginning. He had come to confront his mother, and now he had to ensure that the truth would prevail. As Clara and Maurício stood there, stunned and powerless, Lucas knew he had achieved his goal. The day that was meant to be a celebration had turned into a revelation of hidden truths. And Lucas, standing in the midst of the chaos, felt a sense of vindication that, for a moment, made all the struggles and pain worth it. The silence that followed Lucas's accusation was heavy, like a storm about to break. All eyes were fixed on him, and the atmosphere, once so luxurious and serene, was now charged with tension. Clara, frozen at the altar, looked at her son as if he were a stranger. Her eyes, once filled with pride, were now full of fear and disbelief. Maurício, standing beside her, still maintained a mask of calm, but Lucas could see the rigid tension in his posture, his facial muscles tight, his hand subtly gripping Clara's arm as if trying to control both her and the situation. Lucas took a deep breath, feeling the weight of every gaze, but knowing he had come too far to turn back. He surveyed the faces around him, the mouths agape in surprise, the whispers among the elite guests who would never have imagined witnessing such a scene. But this did not intimidate him. In fact, the chaos he was creating gave him strength. After all, he was not there to please anyone. He was there to save his mother, even if she didn't understand that at the moment. "Lucas," Clara said, trying to keep her voice steady, but failing miserably, "you're embarrassing me in front of everyone. What are you doing? Is this some kind of revenge for everything that happened between us?" There was pain in her voice, but also something more. That tone. That way Clara had of trying to shift the focus onto someone else, a skill she had perfected over the years and that Lucas knew all too well. But this time, he was not going to back down. "Mom, this isn't about me or what happened between us," he said, keeping his voice firm, though his throat was tight. "This is about the man you're about to marry. I know you won't believe me now, but you need to listen. I've spent the last few years researching Maurício. He isn't who you think he is. He isn't the upright man you believe him to be." The guests, who had been whispering in small groups before, were now completely silent, anxious for what would come next. Clara looked at Maurício, as if seeking an answer, but he just shook his head with a faint smile, trying to maintain a facade of tranquility. Lucas. Maurício spoke, finally breaking the silence with his cold, calculated voice. He stepped forward, not letting go of Clara, as if he wanted to keep her under his control. You've always had a vivid imagination, haven't you? Always trying to create stories to sabotage what you can't control. And now, you're doing it again. Everyone here knows about your troubled past. What do you think you'll accomplish with this? Embarrassing your mother? Putting on a show? Maurício's insinuation was met with judgmental looks from the guests. Lucas felt the pressure, but he was prepared. He knew Maurício would try to discredit him, paint him as the problematic and rebellious son, someone who couldn't be taken seriously. But Lucas was no longer playing a game of words. He was armed with facts. Maurício, Lucas began, his eyes locked on the man who was now looking at him with disdain. You can lie to others, but you can't lie to the facts. You think you can silence me with your lies, but I brought evidence. Evidence that exposes everything you are. Lucas pulled a folder from inside his coat and held it up for everyone to see. The documents inside that folder represented years of thorough investigation, sleepless nights, and contacts he never thought he'd have to reach out to. He opened the folder and began to speak firmly as he pulled out papers and showed them to the audience, as if revealing the truth in the court of life. These are financial documents showing transactions conducted by Maurício Thompson under false names, he started, his voice gaining strength as he presented the evidence. He is involved in fraud schemes, money laundering, and stock manipulation. There are records of failed companies in his name, companies he deliberately sank for profit. My father, David Miller, had businesses ruined by men like Maurício, and now the same man is trying to infiltrate our family even more. The whispers among the guests grew again. Lucas felt the panic rising among them. After all, they were sitting next to a man who, according to the documents Lucas was showing, was not just an opportunist but a criminal. Maurício, for his part, remained steadfast, though a shadow of irritation crossed his face. He stepped forward, releasing Clara's hand and glaring at Lucas with a fierce look. This is ridiculous, Maurício said with a nervous laugh, but there was something in his voice that betrayed the growing tension. These are baseless accusations, and you know it, Lucas. You're making up these lies because you can't handle the fact that your mother found someone who makes her happy. You lost your place in the family, and now you want to destroy it. Lucas knew Maurício's words would be enough to sow doubt among some guests, but he wasn't shaken. He was no longer fighting with just words. These documents have been verified, Lucas continued, undeterred by Maurício's rising tone. And more than that, I have testimonies from former associates of yours, people who were harmed by your actions. They are willing to come forward if necessary. The panic on Clara's face was evident now. She looked at Maurício, as if seeking some confirmation that all of this was a lie. But Maurício remained silent for a moment, unable to provide an immediate response. And that moment of hesitation was enough for doubt to begin setting in. Please, Lucas, Clara pleaded, her voice choking with emotion, desperation overflowing in her eyes. Would you really do this at my wedding? Would you make me go through this humiliation? I raised you, gave you everything I could. Isn't it enough that you left? Now you want to ruin what's left of my life. These words cut deep. Lucas felt the emotional blow, but he didn't retreat. He knew his mother was trying to appeal to the emotional side, as she always did, but this wasn't an emotional situation. It was a matter of truth and safety. He knew deep down Clara was still blinded by the love she felt for Maurício, but he also knew that the doubt he had planted was beginning to grow. Mom, I'm not trying to ruin your life, he responded, his voice softer now, but still filled with determination. I'm trying to save it. Clara's eyes filled with tears, and she looked again at Maurício, who was now visibly shaken, trying to maintain his confident posture. But the documents in Lucas's hands were real. Doubt hung in the air like a poison spreading slowly among the guests. Maurício, realizing the situation was slipping out of his control, took another step forward, now toward Clara. "This is a dirty trick, Clara," he said vehemently. "Your son is trying to manipulate you, to drive a wedge between us. He's always wanted control, and now that he's lost it, he'll do anything to separate us." Clara stood between the two men, torn as if she were in a nightmare. Lucas could see the internal struggle in her eyes. She didn't know who to trust. But for the first time in a long while, Lucas saw that his mother was beginning to see the truth. The silent chaos that had settled over the ceremony was almost palpable. The silence among the guests, once filled with whispers and murmurs, was now charged with a suffocating tension. Clara was at the center of this emotional whirlwind, standing between two men who, in different ways, had shaped her life. The son she had lost to her own stubbornness, and the man she believed to be her new beginning. But now, at that altar, the truth was revealing itself, and the perfection Clara had so desperately tried to maintain was disintegrating before her eyes. Maurício was still trying to hold his composure. He was a skilled manipulator, always subtly controlling others. But Lucas had taken control from him. No matter how much he tried to maintain a facade of calm, the nervousness began to show on his face, in his tense and hurried movements. He looked at Clara, trying to appeal to her emotionally, but now there was something new in her eyes: doubt. Lucas remained firm, though part of him felt the impact of his mother's words. He knew he was causing pain, exposing truths she wasn't prepared to hear. But it was necessary. Maurício was close to becoming an irreversible part of her life, and Lucas knew that if he didn't stop it now, the damage would be far greater in the future. Clara took a step back, placing her hand over her chest as if she were trying to catch her breath. Doubt grew with every passing second, but she still resisted the idea that the entire dream she had built with Maurício could be a lie. After all, she had trusted him with her life, her business, and, most importantly, with what was left of her happiness after David's death. How could she have been so wrong? "Lucas," Clara began, her voice trembling as she glanced fleetingly at the documents he was holding, as if they were a snake ready to strike. "Do you really believe Maurício is this monster you're describing? That he would ruin our lives? All he's done is help us. He was by our side when no one else was. How can you be so sure?" Lucas took a deep breath. The weight of emotions was beginning to intensify, but he knew he needed to stay calm. This was the most critical moment. "I don't just believe it, Mom," he said, his voice firm. "I know. Maurício isn't just a man who's made mistakes in the past. He's calculating, and everything he's done has been to gain your trust and, eventually, control everything that's yours. He's destroyed entire businesses, made enemies who are still paying the price for associating with him. I have documents, testimonies, and if you still don't believe me, I can bring those people here right now." Maurício, realizing he was losing ground, took another step forward, his features now hardened by irritation. He was no longer the elegant, controlled man he had tried to appear. Desperation was starting to show, though it was still contained. "This is absurd," he shouted, turning to the guests and to Clara, trying to regain control of the narrative. "Clara, you know who I am. I built a future for us. This is your son speaking. The same son who's been unable to handle the responsibilities you tried to give him. He's always been like this, always creating chaos where there isn't any. He's jealous. He can't stand to see me by your side." Maurício's words, though spoken with fervor, sounded desperate to Lucas. He could see that the more the man spoke, the more fragile he seemed. The masks were coming off, and Clara, finally, was beginning to see that. Clara looked at Maurício, her eyes now filled with tears. The doubt was still there, but she was starting to understand that maybe, just maybe, Lucas was right. Her gaze shifted from Maurício's tense face to the documents in Lucas's hands. She knew her son wouldn't come here unprepared. Lucas had always been meticulous, stubborn when something consumed him. If he was here with proof in hand, it wasn't for play. It was because he had a truth to reveal. "Show me," she said, her voice fragile but filled with a new determination. "Show me what you have, Lucas." Lucas, with a sigh of relief mixed with apprehension, took a few steps forward and handed the folder to Clara. His hands trembled slightly as she opened the documents, her eyes racing over the lines of text and tables. The papers in her hands seemed heavier as she flipped through them, her breathing becoming irregular. With every new page, Clara saw the evidence. Transactions in Mauricio's name, large sums transferred to shell companies that disappeared afterward, complaints from former partners who claimed to have been manipulated and driven to bankruptcy by him. It was as if, suddenly, the veil over her eyes was being forcefully torn away. This can't be true," she whispered, almost voiceless, as if she didn't want to believe what she was seeing. "It can't be." Mauricio, now realizing the extent of the damage, tried to move forward, but his posture was crumbling. "Clara, you know this is all a setup. These documents could be forged. Anyone with money can buy testimonies. Lucas is trying to manipulate you because he's never accepted the fact that we're together. Will you believe these lies instead of trusting me, the one who has been by your side for the past few years?" But Clara wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes were fixed on the words in front of her, and the truth was hitting her like a sledgehammer. She felt betrayed, not only by Mauricio but by herself. How had she not seen this before? How had she allowed him to come so close, to control so much of her life? Slowly, she raised her eyes to Mauricio, and for the first time in a long time, there was a painful clarity in her gaze. "You deceived me," she whispered, her words cutting through the air like a sharp blade. "You used my pain, used my vulnerability." Mauricio desperately tried to maintain control, his eyes growing darker. "Clara, I love you. That doesn't change anything. These papers, that's the past. I'm a different man now. I did everything for us. Don't let what he's doing destroy what we have." But Clara had already made up her mind. Slowly, she took another step back, the documents still trembling in her hands. "You did everything for yourself," she replied, her voice low but filled with a new conviction. "And I was blind." The ceremony, now a nightmare scene, was completely destroyed. The guests were stunned, some whispering to each other, but most were captivated by the drama unfolding before their eyes. Lucas, though feeling the bitter taste of victory, knew this was only the beginning. His mother had just lost, once again, what she thought was her happiness. And though he had saved her from a worse fate, the damage was done. Clara looked at Lucas, tears finally streaming down her face. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, as if the weight of years of separation and pain was about to come crashing down on her. "I'm so sorry for not listening to you before." Lucas, with a heavy heart, merely nodded. The pain between them was still immense, but in that moment, something had begun to change. Mauricio, now alone at the altar, knew he had lost. The man who had always been in control was now unmasked, and the weight of his own truth had finally hit him. Without another word, he slowly stepped back as the chaos around him grew. The sound of whispers among the guests seemed distant, almost irrelevant, as Clara remained at the altar, the documents trembling in her hands. The reality of Mauricio's betrayal was still seeping into her mind, piercing through the layers of denial she had built up over the past years. It was as if everything was happening in slow motion. The gazes of her friends, business associates, and even the media, all fixed on her, observing the collapse of the woman who had always been the image of strength and success. Lucas, just a few meters away from her, felt the weight of the moment. He had exposed the truth, but in doing so, had caused irreparable emotional damage. What he had so desperately wanted, to save his mother from disaster, now seemed like a bitter victory. He didn't take pride in the devastation in Clara's eyes, but he knew it was necessary. Someday, perhaps, she would understand what he had done, but not at that moment. Clara let the documents fall to the ground, the papers scattering like dead leaves in the wind. She couldn't bear to look at them for another second. Each page, each line, was a brutal reminder of her blindness. She had spent years denying Lucas's suspicions, pushing him out of her life because she believed he was wrong, when in fact, she herself had been manipulated. She felt weak, something that was not common for Clara Miller. "I was a fool," she murmured, almost voiceless. "How didn't I see this?" Lucas stepped forward but hesitated. There was so much between them, an abyss carved by years of mistrust, pain, and separation. He wanted to comfort her, wanted to say that everything would be okay, but the words seemed small in the face of what had happened. Instead, he stood there, watching as Clara slowly turned her eyes toward him. Clara's eyes, now wet and red, locked onto Lucas's. For so long, she had seen him as an enemy, someone who threatened her happiness, her stability. But now, she knew he was the only person who had always wanted the best for her, even when she refused to see it. "Lucas," she said, her voice trembling, "I was so wrong about you. I can't believe I pushed you away like that. I was so lost, and I ended up pushing away the only person who was always trying to protect me." Lucas felt a lump in his throat. It wasn't easy to hear that. He had always wanted his mother to see how wrong she had been about him. But seeing her so vulnerable and hurt was much more painful than he had imagined. He opened his mouth to speak, but the words just wouldn't come out. Clara took a step toward him, slowly, as if each movement required immense effort. When she finally stood face to face with her son, her eyes were filled with regret. "I wasted so much time, Lucas, and I lost you in the process." He finally found his voice. "You haven't lost me, Mom. I'm here." Those words, simple but laden with meaning, struck Clara hard. She shook her head, feeling the weight of everything she had done, of all the wrong choices that had led to the rift between her and Lucas. But now, faced with the truth, she didn't want to lose anything more. Without hesitation, Clara took another step and, with silent tears streaming down her face, enveloped Lucas in a hug. A hug she should have given years ago, when he needed it most. And Lucas, surprised by the emotion, hugged his mother back, feeling the warmth of reconciliation, even though there was still much healing to be done. As they embraced, Maurício, standing on the sidelines, realized the game was over. He had been unmasked, and the woman he had so skillfully manipulated was now beyond his control. Without saying a word, he began to slowly retreat, his figure collapsing as he walked towards the exit, knowing there was no redemption left. The guests' gazes followed him with disdain and shock, and he knew that the society he had tried so hard to deceive was finally seeing the truth. The man who once controlled everything was now leaving the place alone, under the weight of the ruin of his reputation. When Maurício disappeared from view, the weight of the moment seemed to lighten, but the atmosphere was still charged with emotion. Lucas, still holding his mother, felt a mix of relief and sadness. He had achieved what he wanted, but at too high a cost. The life his mother had built over the years was in ruins. All that was left was a raw, unvarnished truth, and the fractured relationship they needed to rebuild. Clara gently pulled away from Lucas, wiping away the tears that had streaked her cheeks. She looked around, seeing the guests still standing, unsure of what to do. This was supposed to be her grand celebration, the fresh start of her life, but now all that remained was the end of an illusion. "I think the party is over," Clara said in a weak voice, trying to force a smile, but failing miserably. Lucas nodded. "Yes, it's over." Clara looked around once more, feeling everyone's eyes on her, but for the first time, she didn't care. She was exhausted, emotionally drained, and the weight of her wrong decisions still haunted her. All she wanted now was to leave, to put behind that fantasy she had built and which was now crumbling. "I need some time," Clara said, her voice faltering, almost like an apology. "I need to think. We need to talk calmly." Lucas nodded again. There was much to discuss, much to resolve between them, but now was not the time. They needed space to breathe, to process what had just happened. The important thing was that, for the first time in years, Clara was ready to listen to him. "I'm here," he repeated, offering her the support she had so often rejected in the past. Clara took a deep breath and began to walk slowly towards the exit. Lucas followed, maintaining a respectful distance, while the guests, still in shock, watched the scene. No one dared to speak. The spectacle had ended, and what remained was the heavy silence of truth. As mother and son walked together out of the vineyard, Lucas felt something he hadn't felt in a long time. Hope. The road ahead would be difficult, filled with wounds to heal, but he knew that somehow they would find a way to rebuild what had been destroyed. They had survived the collapse of an empire of lies. Now, they could begin something new together. That wedding that never happened wasn't the end. It was, in fact, a new beginning.